the Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman.
Good evening.
Good evening. Think we're live here. So today I have with me Mr. Joseph Jensens, who is a Canadian. Say hello.
Hello.
And we're going to be reading a story that you told me about. It's called The Mad Trapper of Rat River.
Yeah.
So I thought since you're a Canadian, you could be with me when I read this story, and it might add a lot to it. You can teach me all about Canadian culture and stuff.
For sure, yeah.
But where'd you grow up in Canada?
Little town up north called Barry's Bay.
Real quick, have you ever shot a gun? Because this story has a lot of guns in it with the Royal Canadian Mounties.
I have, although I confess my first time was in America.
Oh.
In Texas, actually.
I'm proud that the first time you shot was in Texas. Okay then, well let's begin. This is The Mad Trapper of Rat River by Hammerson Peters. Just to be clear, I've never read this before, so this is all going to be totally new to me. I think it's better that way. The so-called Mad Trapper of Rat River first appeared in the vicinity of Rat River, a tributary of the Mackenzie Delta located a short distance from the Arctic Ocean in the summer of 1931. Do you know where all these landmarks are, more or less?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay, because I have no idea. The few who met him described him as a dour, taciturn woodsman with the faintest hint of a Scandinavian accent who went to great lengths to avoid human contact. What type of an accent is that? Scandinavian?
Nordic?
Yeah. Norwegian.
Yeah.
Okay. He went by the name of Albert Johnson, although he almost certainly borrowed this name from the brother of another trapper who lived in the region at the time. In December 1931, a native trapper named William Neruso arrived in the tiny settlement of Arctic Red River Post, situated at the confluence of the Arctic Red and Mackenzie Rivers just south of what is now Inuvik, NWT, and informed the local RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that someone was springing his traps and hanging them up on tree branches. He suspected that Johnson was behind the mischief and asked the Mounties to investigate him. So can you translate those acronyms?
Yeah, Inuvik is a town in the Northwest Territories.
Okay.
Which is, it's pretty far up north, right near Alaska. And then RCMP stands for Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is our national police force.
So NWT, is that like a state? Is it like we say South Dakota or something?
Almost. It's territory, so not quite a state. But.
Oh, okay. All right. See, we're learning. On December 26th, Mountie Constable Alfred Buns King and a Gwich'in Indian special constable named Joe Bernard trekked to Johnson's cabin on snowshoes in order to question the mysterious trapper about Neruso's allegation. How cold does it get in Canada in December?
Probably, I'm thinking Celsius, but probably like -15, -20 Celsius.
-20 Celsius?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what's that in Fahrenheit?
Probably
roughly
20. 15, 20
Okay.
maybe.
What's the coldest it's got for you?
-30
Okay.
Celsius.
That's significantly worse.
Pretty cold.
Okay.
Don't want to go outside when it's like that.
Although Johnson was inside his cabin at the time of the Mounties' arrival, as evidenced by the smoke that issued from the chimney, he refused to speak with them, let alone open the door to them, and put a burlap sack over the window when they attempted to look inside. Knowing they couldn't force their way inside Johnson's cabin without authorization, the two Mounties made their way 80 miles, 129 kilometers, down the Husky River to the settlement of Aklavik, NWT, where another RCMP outpost was located. They're very polite, these Mounties. They didn't have permission. Are they still that way?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
5 days later, on New Year's Eve, King and Bernard returned to Johnson's cabin with a search warrant and two additional RCMP officers from Aklavik, Constable R.G. McDowell and Special Constable Lazarus Sittichinley. As before, wood smoke issued from the cabin's chimney. What's the difference between wood smoke and other smoke? I guess there's a color to it. Indicating that Johnson was inside. As the Mounties approached the cabin, King called out to Johnson from a distance, asking him to come outside and informing him that he was authorized to break in his door if he did not comply with his request. As before, there was no reply. The Mountie approached the cabin cautiously and rapped on the door. His knocks were answered by a rifle blast which hurled him backwards into the snow. Johnson had shot King through the door. Wait, everybody had guns back then? They don't now, though, right?
Well,
there was a gun grab at some point?
yeah. Well, yeah. It's not as common, but they do have them up north.
Oh, they still do?
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. The wounded Mountie scrambled back towards the sled, one gloved hand clamped tightly over his injury as his companions returned fire. Alarmingly proximate bullets zipped by as the Mounties lashed their fallen comrade to the sleigh and took off at breakneck speed, bound for Aklavik. Due to atrocious weather conditions, the patrol arrived at their destination after 24 hours of hard traveling. King was rushed to the local hospital where he eventually made a full recovery. Upon hearing the Mountie's report, Inspector Alexander Eames, commander of the Western Arctic Subdistrict of the RCMP and head of the garrison at Aklavik, decided to lead a 10-man patrol to Johnson's cabin and arrest the trapper for his offense. The 9 Mounties, along with 42 sled dogs, that's a lot, arrived at Johnson's cabin on January 9th, 1932, by an obscure Indian trail, and after a brief reconnaissance mission, during which they determined that he was still inside, approached it cautiously. At first, the Mounties beseeched Johnson to surrender himself peacefully. He would not be hanged for murder, they informed him, as he had not managed to kill Alfred King. That is so kind of them.
Wow.
It's totally different in America. They would have just blown his head off, you know?
Yeah.
Back in 1930s, of course. Their entreaties were met with a fusillade of gunfire, which the lawmen quickly returned. As they circled about his cabin, firing as they went, the Mounties learned that the trapper had bored loopholes on all sides of his cabin, turning his log shack into a veritable fortress, and was able to harry his assailants from every angle. That is crazy.
Yeah, he was pretty insane.
He really was the mad trapper of Rat River. All day long and well into the night, the 9 Mounties exchanged gunfire with the lone desperado. You might not know this, but what guns did the Mounties have? Do you know? It was probably revolvers. Were they like Colt 45s back then, or
probably
like American guns, or?
I think they may have had Lee Enfields by then.
Oh, so they they had rifles so they had rifles,
right.
Lee Enfields. But what was their pistol? Because it does look a little, maybe it's a 1911 in some of the pictures. I'm not sure, because anyway, that's just I'm wondering. Maybe someone could look it up and write in. Try as they might, the RCMP officers, special constables, and Indian scout, we were right, so one of them is an Indian, all of them experienced hunters, were unable to get the upper hand on the mysterious Scandinavian trapper. Finally, sometime after midnight, the besiegers managed to breach Johnson's cabin by lobbing several lit sticks of dynamite onto the roof. Wow, they're not so polite anymore. They're going all out. A tremendous explosion ensued, obliterating the cabin's roof and partially caving in its walls. This is why you were so excited about it when you first read it.
Yeah.
Before the smoke had cleared, Eames and Garland stormed the breach, whereupon Johnson, who had sheltered himself from the blast in a pit he had dug in the cabin floor, shot Garland's flashlight out of his hand. That's so creepy. He was in a pit. The Mounties retreated back into the darkness and, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, decided to return to Aklavik in defeat. They didn't get him?
No, it was pretty.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
So he's still out there?
He's still out there. He's pretty tenacious.
Golly.
Yeah.
Dynamite, everything?
Yeah. He really was crazy.
Yeah. 1 week after the shootout, a second posse composed of 7 men left Aklavik for Albert Johnson's cabin. On the way, they were joined by 11 Gwich'in Indians. They're all turning against him. The 18-man party arrived at the remains of Johnson's cabin without incident. Despite their best efforts, however, they were unable to find any sign of the trapper or his tracks. Eventually, it was decided that, for logistical purposes, a 4-man team would continue to search for Johnson further up the Rat River. The four men spent several days combing the Rat River for any sign of Albert Johnson. They had nearly reached the limits of their endurance and were dangerously low on provisions when Riddle spied a faint pair of snowshoe tracks, which Garland and Millen recognized as Johnson's. Oh boy. With fresh wind in their sails, the Mounties took up the chase. They followed Johnson's tracks for days. The wily trapper traveled on hard-packed snow wherever possible in an effort to leave a less visible trail, and took an erratic, circuitous, and often circular route over all manner of obstacles in the hope of throwing off his pursuers. To the Mounties' dismay, he seemed to have almost superhuman stamina. Johnson, with a heavy pack on his back and a pair of snowshoes on his feet, appeared to be traveling twice as fast as they were, in spite of the sled dogs that aided their efforts. Even more disturbing was the fact that the outlaw trapper, as evidenced by his leavings, only built small fires beneath snowbanks in an effort to avoid detection, and subsisted entirely on squirrels and rabbits that he snared, apparently cognizant of the likelihood that firing his rifle at bigger game would give away his position. With the help of an Indian hunter, the four Mounties finally managed to locate Johnson's camp and approach it by way of a shortcut. The lawmen attempted to ambush the fugitive and soon found themselves engaged in a bitter firefight with him. Another one, wow. During this confrontation, Constable Edgar Spike Millen was killed instantly by a bullet through the heart. Oh, that's too bad. According to some accounts, Johnson let out a gruff laugh when he shot the Mountie. He sounds like a scum. The only utterance any of his pursuers would ever hear from him. So he never talked. Golly. The Mounties did not feel the need to press the attack, as Johnson was trapped between them and a sheer cliff, near the base of which he had built his camp, and had nowhere to run. Incredibly, Johnson made his escape by climbing the cliff that bounded him with the aid of a woodcutter's axe. So by the time they got another search party up, the mad trapper had crossed over into the Yukon Territory and was heading west for the Richardson Mountains. I bet you that's a long way away. I bet you he was making tracks.
Yeah. I think he was heading towards Alaska. He was trying to get out of Canada.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's who was trying to cross the mountains, if I remember correctly.
Whoa. The following day, a raging blizzard precluded May from investigating the tracks further and the Mounties from continuing their pursuit. For the lawmen, this setback was not particularly perturbing on account of the fact that Johnson was now trapped at the foot of the Richardson Mountains. Incredibly, Johnson used this opportunity to pull off an extraordinary stunt that has bewildered mountain guides ever since. During the blizzard, Albert Johnson scaled the Richardson Mountains. I guess that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Instead of crossing the divide by way of the Wright or McDougall passes, the mad trapper opted to climb up and over the mountain's high ridges, an enterprise which local trappers and Indians assured the Mounties was impossible at that time of the year for all but the most skilled mountaineers. Yet, incredibly, Albert Johnson achieved this spectacular feat of endurance without any technical equipment in the middle of a howling blizzard. To this day, mountaineers are baffled as to how Johnson managed this prodigious achievement. That's crazy. On February 14th, May picked up his quarry's trail again, finding it 20 miles up the Eagle River. Johnson had found the trail of a migrating caribou herd and had taken the opportunity to conceal his tracks within it. That clever devil. On February 17th, Staff Sergeant Earl F. Hersey, who had been ranging ahead of the Mountie posse, ran head-on into Johnson, who was in the process of stepping back through his own tracks. Hersey quickly overcame his surprise, raised his rifle, and started shooting at the outlaw. Johnson, in turn, ran a few paces towards the frozen Eagle River before suddenly whirling around and firing a single shot at his pursuer. Johnson's bullet hit Hersey in the left elbow, passed through his left knee, and buried itself into his chest, lifting Hersey clean off the ground in the process. This guy's possessed.
Yikes.
By this time, the rest of the 12-man posse had caught up with Hersey. Believing their fallen comrade to be dead, they broke into 3 groups and closed in on the mad trapper. With no time to run, Albert Johnson planted his heavy pack in the snow in the middle of the Eagle River, took cover behind it, and prepared to make his last stand. Johnson was subjected to a withering barrage as the Mounties took up positions around him, firing as they went. The Mounties worked themselves into a particularly advantageous position, flanking Johnson by climbing up to a high bank behind him before shooting him 3 times. One bullet passed through his shoulder, another buried itself into his side, and a third detonated a cluster of ammunition in his pocket, blowing a chunk of flesh out of his thigh. Incredibly, the mad trapper seemed impervious to his wounds, firing round after round at his assailants with unnerving accuracy. As the shootout raged on, May circled over the battlefield in his bush plane. After a particularly long spell between shots, he flew in for a better look. He described this moment in a later reminiscence, saying, "As I flew over the fugitive's lair, it seemed as though he was lying in an unnatural position. Swinging back, I nosed the Belanca down till our skis were tickling the snow." I guess their plane had skis on it.
Oh, wow.
Johnson, I could plainly see as I flashed past, was lying face down in the snow, his right arm outflung, grasping his rifle. I knew as I looked that he was dead. May landed his plane nearby as the Mounties cautiously approached Johnson's lifeless body. Quote, "As I stooped over and saw him," said the pilot, "I got the worst shock I've ever had. For Johnson's lips were curled back from his teeth in the most terrible sneer I've ever seen on a man's face. It was the most awful grimace of hate I'd ever seen. The hard-boiled, bitter hate of a man who knows he's trapped at last and is determined to take as many enemies as he can with him down the trail he knows he's going to hit." Wow. So on his person, the Mounties found $2,410 in Canadian bills, 5 American banknotes, a glass jar containing 5 pearls and 5 pieces of golden dental fillings, a jar of alluvial gold, a Model 99 Savage 30-30 rifle, and 39 30-30 cartridges. Okay, I wondered what he had. It sounded like he had a pretty good gun. And he also had a 16-gauge Ivor Johnson shotgun and 4 shotgun shells, a Winchester, it just keeps going, a Winchester 22 rifle, a compass, 32 Beecham's pills, a 19th century cure-all patent medicine, a woodcutter's axe, a pack sack, a can of lard, a dead squirrel, and a dead whiskey jack. What in the world is a whiskey jack?
Sure.
Well, I guess that wraps up the Mad Trapper of Rat River. And I hope you all enjoyed this podcast. And thank you so much, Mr. Jensens, for coming on.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
And also for the listeners, you can go back and listen to our Royal Canadian Mounted Police episode that I did some time ago. I think it was a year ago. Those are some really good stories in there. Well, I intend to have you on more often, and we'll cover more Canadian stories. And eventually you'll teach me all about Canadian culture and stuff like that, because it was something we didn't know about growing up. And I, in turn, will read you lots of Texas Ranger stories.
Yes.
And actually, next, I'm thinking of reading The Long Walk by Slavomir Ravich.
Oh, wow.
Have you read that before?
I haven't, actually.
You haven't read that?
No.
That is a fantastic read. So that's going to be a long-term project because it's pretty long. But anyway, thank you so much, Mr. Jensens, for joining me. And I hope all of those listening enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for listening, and Godspeed.
God bless.